Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice Radio. So today we're going to do something a little bit different, and we are going to look at some ridiculously rare Japanese cards, which are very, very, very hard to actually get. It's not looking great, ladies and gentlemen. It's not looking great. If you want to buy them, if you want to admire them, well, that's okay, ladies and gentlemen. That sounds pretty good to me. Now, this information has been collated by the lovely Antoine Boulet, not just a wonderful person who provides translations, also gives us great information about redonkulously rare cards. How rare? Well, the most common card we're going to be talking about today is the Yamper tournament promo from over in Japan. It was a Champions League promo, and there are, and I trust the numbers on this one, there's about 4,000 of these. Now, that might sound like a few, but 4,000 isn't a lot. It's kind of weird, because people think that Pokemon cards are made in very, very low numbers. So you look at something like that. Let's go for the Umbreon. I did my Pokemon Awards the other day. I put it up on Christmas Day, and I told you that this was the most expensive card from just a regular set that was released this year. But there are many, 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 many thousands of this card out there. And most people think there aren't, and that's kind of funny. I've had people tell me I'm stupid for saying that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of this card out there. But the fact of the matter is, most of these are pulled by kids who don't really know what they're pulling. And the impression you get from Facebook, etc., is that this card is a lot rarer than that. It's not. There are loads of them out there. 4,000 Yamper? That's really not very much. I believe the Yamper was literally just given out as just turn up and play it promo, so that's kind of cool. It is just a reprint of Yamper, but with, the stamp. Now, there are certain cards that have been released as 3,000, including, and this makes me very, very sad, the Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon, the EVV Max. Now, these were given away in Japan for basically what you had to do was you had to go along to the online site and you had to basically fill in a deck list and a little report of a game that you played of the Pokemon TCG over the summer, and you had to have a Japanese address, you had to be a player with an account over in Japan, you had to fill in a Japanese deck list, fill in a form in Japan. This wasn't the kind of thing that random people would just be going to enter, like the lotteries on the Pokemon Center Online. This was really hard to get, ladies and gentlemen. Proper difficult to get. But then you got one of each of these, and there were 3,000 of them. They've ended up really quite hyper rare. Just like the Full Art Charizard V. Now, the Full Art Charizard V, there are a few of these tournaments we're going to be mentioning. These were basically from sealed tournaments over in Japan. So what they essentially do is they have something akin to a pre-release, and you rock up, and you take part in the pre-release. And if you get top 4 at the pre-release, you got yourself one of these Full Art Charizard. It's rather lovely. But it wasn't in a proper set in Japan like it is over here. The only way to get this Charizard was to go to one of these pre-release events in Japan. And incidentally, these events in Japan were oversubscribed, and you had to kind of put your name down and cross your fingers and hope that you were selected to actually be allowed to take part. And then you had to go and get top 4 at them. Not particularly easy, shall we say. And that's why there's only actually 3,000 of them out there, because, well, that's how many were given out. Now, that's actually more than there were of the Full Art Mewtwo. Now, Mewtwo GX, we had a very, very similar thing going on here, because it was a top 4 promo that was given away to people at these pre-release style events. Now, it's interesting here because the Charizard has actually ended up being a lot less rare than the Mewtwo. Now, when I say a lot less rare, let's be clear, there are 3,000 Charizard and 2,400 Mewtwo. Let's not pretend this Mewtwo is really easy to get hold of or anything stupid like that. It's a very rare, very expensive, very sought-after Mewtwo that's very hard to actually find, but the Mewtwo is a fair bit rarer than the Charizard. And the reason essentially is because they put on more tournaments for the Charizard. It was happening over lockdown, etc., I believe, if my memory serves correctly. And what Pokemon actually did was they put on extra tournaments for the Charizard. They made it a little bit more available, which is clearly a good thing. Now, moving on, there were 1,200 of the Rainbow Rare Charizard V Max, and this was actually done at the same time as the Full Art Charizard V. Because what we basically saw was top 4 got Charizard V, but the winner, and it was only the winner, would get yourself the Rainbow Rare Charizard V Max. So in order to get this, you had to enter this tournament, you had to actually be selected to take part, you had to turn up, and you had to win the whole darn thing. And if you did that, and you turned up, and you won the whole darn thing, then you could get yourself one of only 1,200 Charizard V Max that exist in Japanese. And obviously it's a Charizard, it's very rare, etc. And again, they quadrupled the amount of tournaments that they were actually putting on here, if my memory serves. There was supposed to be a lot fewer Charizard V Max. They went and did a bunch of extra tournaments, and they made this a lot more available than it was. And even after all of that, you still end up with a card where there's only actually 1,200 of them out there. These are ridiculous. Incidentally, I am not going to be really trying to put values on these cards in this video, purely because it's just a nightmare to actually do that. Because there are so few of them, because they don't get sold very often, etc. It's just, especially when we get down to the bottom end of the list, it's a little bit ridiculous. Suffice it to say that it is an extremely rare thing. For anyone that's wondering, the Charizard one was with the legendary Heartbeat packs, and you would essentially get 10 packs of them, and you would go and make a deck, and you would go. And it was fun. And it is exactly the kind of thing which I desperately wanted to actually get a chance to go and take part in, and I never could. And that made me very, very sad indeed. Now, in terms of only being 400 actually given out, we've got that Victini we talked about the other day. Now, remember, this is an error Victini. Essentially, it was supposed to be a reprint of the Victini from Sword and Shield with new artwork. It ended up being a reprint of the one from Battle Styles with new artwork, and they have said they're actually going to give out new versions of this, so we know no more of these are actually going to be gone and given out, and that's brilliant if you've got one, because man, these are going to be hard to actually go and pick up. We've then got Vitality Band and Escape Rope. These were given out as, I want to say, top 32 promos over at tournaments in Japan, but you see, we've ended up in a situation where these tournaments have been cancelled a lot. So whereas these cards wouldn't actually be anywhere near as rare if they were released in other years, because they ended up being released in years where a whole bunch of tournaments actually went and got cancelled, they have ended up being so much rarer than they would otherwise have been, which is why these kind of end up on the list, whereas a bunch of others, well, quite frankly, don't. Now, if you want a card even rarer than that, we've got Mewtwo GX, the Hyper Rare, the Rainbow Rare, of which only 300 copies were ever actually made. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And this is the same thing we talked about with the Charizard. There were basically pre-release tournaments. I believe this was for Shiny Star V. And essentially you would go along, and there were 300 of them, and the winner of each of the 300 tournaments went and got themselves a Hyper Rare Mewtwo. But like I said, in order to actually get this, you would have to try and enter the tournament. If selected to enter the tournament, you would then have to rock up and win the whole thing, and there were only 300 chances to do so, and most people weren't actually able to enter more than one, and there were some people who weren't even able to enter one, and that has made it a quite ridiculous card indeed. Now, weirdly enough, there are a couple prints of Palpad that only had 220 copies released, and again, this is the same kind of thing as we've seen on some of the other promos. It was never supposed to be a particularly rare card, but the problem is, we ended up in a situation where they were supposed to be giving out a bunch of tournaments, loads of the tournaments ended up being cancelled, so not as many were given out as were supposed to be given out, which is why they end up so rare. And then we get to the real gems. You will probably never own this card, but that's all right. I'm not rich either kind of cards. The Masked Royal. Now, the Masked Royal is not a particularly good card. It's not a card that anybody particularly wants. But there was a full art version which was released in Japan, which was never actually released over here. We never got the release of the full art Masked Royal. It is a ridiculously rare card. It is one, well, like I say, basically nobody's... If you don't have this card and you're not rich, you're probably never going to get this card. Now, essentially, there were tournaments over in Japan. I believe this was another one where it was basically like a sealed pre-release where you had to win in order to get the card, except there were only 100 of those tournaments. And they were a few years ago now, unfortunately. It's been a few years since these tournaments happened. And there were only 100 of these ever made, which means that it's just going to be, like I say, trying to actually put a value on this is absolutely ridiculous. Now, along the same lines, we've got Zekrom GX, the Hyper Rare, the Rainbow Rare, and this was the same kind of thing. We had these pre-release style tournaments over in Japan, where there were 100 of them, and you would get yourself the Rainbow Rare Zekrom, but only if you won the entire thing. And even then, like I say, most Japanese tournaments tend to be oversubscribed, at least the bigger and better ones, so you have to be selected just in order to get a chance to go and take part in them, and it gets a little bit silly. Another example of a card which never made its way out in English, incidentally. There is no such thing as an English Rainbow Rare, Hyper Rare, call it what you will, Zekrom GX. And then the last one is cheating a little bit, so we're not going to spend too long on this, but we've got the actual trophy cards, which are given out when you get first, second, and third place at the big tournaments in Japan, like Nationals, Champions League, things of that nature. You can see on the screen here that the numbers are not quite the same for all of them. You will notice that that third place card has double the number of the first and second place cards. That should not be a coincidence, because of course you get that for finishing third or fourth. Interesting little side note here, and this again comes from a conversation I had with the lovely Antoine Boulet a little while ago. Although Pikachu is for third place, and there's actually twice as many of them, it is the most sought after because, well, would you rather have Pikachu, the first partner Pokemon, or the legendaries? Most people would rather have Pikachu, so they end up being the more sought after. Of course, you'll notice they did change when we went into Gen 8. First place is always the box legendary, second place is the basic first partner Pokemon, and third place is Pikachu. I don't like putting that one on the list because, they're actual trophy cards from big tournaments. It feels a bit like cheating, but these are all cards which are going to be very difficult to get hold of. Some of them, like I've said, what we're really looking at here are cards like Escape Rope that should have been a lot less rare, but a lot of tournaments ended up getting cancelled. We've got pre-releases that you had to actually win, which become very, very rare. And then we've got things like mail-in essay writing contests, or report contests, call them what you will. Well, they're really an essay, I suppose. And just cards which, like I say, if you don't have these cards, you probably never will. And that's okay. Except for the fact that there's Yokucheke Flareon, which I will never own, and that makes me sad. Although if I end the year with like 1 million subs, and I earn a huge amount more than I'm currently earning, I'll go and buy one. Putting that out there. For now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to know what you think about these. I want to know which of these cards are your favourite. I want to know which ones you want to try and get hold of. I want to know if you actually own any of these cards. So go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, Look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.